We constantly guess what the future will look like, but we rarely ask how it will be funded. Let's run the numbers. Consider the hypothetical construction of a massive space elevator. This carbon nanotube ribbon, stretching thousands of kilometers directly into the sky, is often framed as a triumph of physics. But from an economic perspective, it represents a very different technological and material scenario. It represents a massive initial capital expenditure with a highly speculative and variable rate of return. Under standard economic assumptions, the funding model of this structure dictates who gets highly restricted access. If a private consortium or a single sovereign nation-state provides the immense upfront capital, they tend to demand exclusive control over the pricing and allocation of these extremely valuable orbital payloads. This creates a fundamental economic question that physical engineering cannot resolve. Who controls access to orbit once the technology to bypass traditional chemical rockets is actually deployed, tested, and operational? The true mystery lies not in the material science of the ribbon, but in the institutional rules that govern its everyday operations. Let us examine the economic mechanics of this potential monopoly. At the core of this scenario lies a severe economic problem of concentrated power. Launching payloads to orbit currently requires overcoming immense physical gravity, representing considerable upfront and high marginal fuel expenses. Currently, rocket launches present high marginal costs and competitive market pricing. A space elevator, however, would tend to shift the entire global commercial space logistics market toward a single natural monopoly structure. Once the massive fixed cost of the ribbon is paid, the marginal cost of lifting a single kilogram of cargo to orbit drops toward near zero levels under this technological and economic assumption. This unique cost structure creates a formidable and durable barrier to entry. Under these specific conditions, no conventional chemical rocket competitor could hope to match the low price offered by this elevator. Consequently, the first actor to establish this infrastructure would likely capture the entire global market demand. This would tend to create an extreme concentration of power over all future orbital access. The owner of this privately operated infrastructure gains the ability to set prices arbitrarily, extracting massive economic rents from every commercial satellite operator, research institution, and sovereign space agency looking upward. To understand this economic dynamic, we must define the characteristics of orbital access. Major infrastructure of this scale typically functions as a highly centralized and easily controlled corporate toll road. The physical elevator ribbon is a highly rivalrous and excludable resource. Only one climber payload can traverse a specific segment of the structure at any given point in time in this scenario. Because access to the climber mechanism can easily be blocked or restricted, the operator holds immense and total leverage. This structure is not public infrastructure like a largely open and unregulated ocean highway. Instead, it resembles a strategic geopolitical choke point. The economics of these choke points suggest that the unregulated gatekeeper owners tend to prioritize revenue maximization over broad public utility or vital scientific development. This incentive structure is exacerbated by the massive costs of initial development. Funding this highly speculative project would tend to require immense pools of upfront capital from global financial and state actors. Private investors, whether corporate or state-backed, would expect a significant premium to compensate for the extreme technological and financial risks of this long, highly capital-intensive initial capital construction and testing phase. Consequently, the initial pricing model would likely focus on high-margin commercial users. This would tend to exclude low-budget scientific research programs in smaller developing nations from accessing these vital orbital slots. The scarcity is no longer the physics of leaving Earth. Under this assumption, the new scarcity becomes the allocation of climber cargo slots on the single functional space elevator carbon ribbon system. Let us trace the causal chain of this monopoly. Under the assumption of profit maximization, the single elevator operator would set transit tolls to maximize their total net revenue streams over time. In economic theory, a monopolist sets a price where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. In this speculative scenario that results in restricted climber capacity and elevated pricing for all customers. Although the elevator could physically lift massive cargo cheaply, the operator would have a clear incentive to restrict climber departures to keep the market transit rates artificially elevated for all customers. This restriction creates a persistent state of artificial scarcity. The entire orbital economy becomes bottlenecked, not by technological limits, but by the monopolist's deliberate and highly rational profit-maximizing pricing strategy. Under these conditions, rent-seeking behavior would tend to flourish. Operators of existing satellites and space stations must pay a significant premium just to maintain their current orbital positions and trajectories. This is because the cost of switching back to traditional and conventional chemical rocket launch systems remains prohibitively expensive, preserving the elevator operator's market dominance over all potential competitors for decades. Furthermore, the owner could easily engage in price discrimination. They might charge wealthy governments high rates while offering discounts to strategically aligned commercial partners and dominant corporate entities in this market. This pricing power turns orbit access into a powerful geopolitical tool. The monopolist can favor specific corporate entities or allied nations, shaping global geopolitical power dynamics to their clear advantage. Consequently, space access is no longer a public common. It behaves more like a sovereign territory controlled by a private gatekeeper extracting substantial economic rent from all global actors involved. The high tolls generate massive profits for the owner, but they also create deadweight loss. Speculative scientific projects with low commercial return are routinely cancelled before their scheduled launch. For instance, astronomical research and climate monitoring satellites might be priced out of orbit mostly, delaying essential scientific data collection that would benefit the entire future space-based global public commons. This shows how a technology intended to expand space access could actually restrict it to a select group of wealthy and politically aligned participants under a private monopoly market model. The extreme concentration of capital required for initial construction makes a decentralized alternative extremely difficult for competing multilateral national coalitions to finance and execute within a highly competitive orbital timeline. Even if a second elevator is planned, the incumbent can temporarily lower prices to discourage the competitor, maintaining their monopoly through well-documented and highly aggressive predatory pricing strategies over time. This predatory pricing threat further deters potential market entrants, solidifying the initial operator's monopoly for the foreseeable future under this highly stable, speculative, long-term market equilibrium and particular economic scenario. However, this monopoly model assumes that sovereign governments and space powers would permit a single private entity to control a strategic orbital transport space asset of this truly immense geopolitical magnitude. In a different scenario, national security concerns might force various state actors to nationalize the entire infrastructure or heavily regulate its operational pricing to resemble a shared regional public utility. Another key assumption is that carbon nanotube materials can scale to support the required tension loads. If these technical limitations persist, the entire theoretical elevator structure remains highly and conceptually unfeasible. Furthermore, if reusable rocket launch systems achieve dramatic cost reductions, the elevator's relative economic advantage over conventional spaceflight would tend to diminish quite rapidly in this scenario. To test this mechanism conceptually, we can model a hypothetical single-route transit system where immense and high fixed costs deter all potential competing infrastructure transit developers from entering the market. In this model, the operator maximizes profit by charging tolls just below the cost of the next best alternative transport method, capturing most of the generated economic surplus value. This simple model reveals that the elevator's pricing is determined by the cost of competitor rockets, rather than the actual operation and maintenance cost of the entire structure itself. This brings us back to the primary question of control. Under our core economic assumptions, the initial operator would wield immense gatekeeping power over all future orbital access routes. If funded by a corporate monopoly, the slot access would tend to be allocated to the highest bidders, prioritizing high-margin commercial payloads over non-profit scientific discovery and space exploration. If funded by a single nation-state, access would likely become a tool of foreign policy, granted or denied based on strategic geopolitical alignment and international cooperation and alliance efforts. Under either funding model, the outcome is a highly political market rather than an open public commons, which shifts immense economic power to an extremely powerful single gatekeeping infrastructure owner. The resolution of this coordination problem depends primarily on the institutional frameworks established by multilateral international agreements long before the first physical elevator ribbon is successfully deployed and made operational. Without international treaties regulating access, a single actor would tend to capture the primary strategic advantage, actively extracting massive economic rents from all other global orbital spaceflight participants in this scenario. However, if a multinational consortium of nations shares the immense initial development costs, the pricing structure could be designed to cover basic operating costs rather than maximize monopoly profit margins. This cooperative global structure would tend to lower the barrier to entry, fostering a significantly more open and collaborative orbital economy for both research and commercial, technological, and economic developers alike. Therefore, the entity that controls the funding model ultimately controls access to orbit, effectively deciding the entire trajectory of all future commercial human space development in this conditional scenario. When evaluating speculative future space technologies, we must look past engineering feasibility. We should instead ask who captures the economic value of the physical infrastructure. If you want to know whether this scenario can persist, follow the incentive structure. Elevated monopoly rents can fund the political defense of the monopoly structure over time. A single space elevator could create an economic dynasty, where the owner decides which space industries grow and which sovereign countries remain grounded on Earth in this scenario. This framework separates technological enthusiasm from economic reality. A massive breakthrough in physics does not automatically guarantee a competitive and fair orbital launch market in the future. Instead, it changes the rules of resource allocation. The critical bottleneck shifts from rocket fuel efficiency directly to political access negotiations and bilateral trade agreements between nations. Change the assumption, and the equilibrium changes with it. A cooperative global funding model yields a fundamentally different, open, and collaborative space economy in this scenario. Ultimately, the cost of entering orbit is not just a function of physical gravity. In this speculative scenario, it is a function of institutional design and rules. As we look toward orbital expansion, the economic rules we write on Earth today shape the distribution of future economic opportunities in the stars. We must analyze these rules and pricing incentives before the carbon ribbon is ever deployed. The future is just incentives at scale. See you tomorrow.